So I'm Chris from Speaking Schools Australasia, and I'm going to get straight into it, and we'll go from there. So I'm here to talk about fostering empathy through debating and public speaking. So let's start with how an idle Tuesday can bring about a life lesson on empathy. It all started when my daughter brought home this drawing from school. And this particular drawing, as usual, was quite colourful. There were some unrecognisable shapes and whatnot. But what I could distinguish was there was a beautiful home. There was sunshine. There were rainbows. There were, colours and textures, crayons and sparkling and sparkle effects. And it really exuded this happiness and joy. And in front of the home, there were two stick figures, one slightly taller than the other. And the one that was slightly taller had crazy hair. So I kind of put two and two together and went, that would be me. And I was right. So we sat down side by side and explored this drawing. And as we explored the drawing, we talked about what each person and sort of, I guess, shape and whatnot represented. And as I said, these particular drawings and stick figures were happy. But then as we explored the drawing further and I looked to the left, I noticed there was a lonesome stick figure. This stick figure had no colour, it was simply black, had quite menacing looking fangs and very small beady eyes. And they got me curious. So I said to my daughter, who's this? And she said, that's Leon. I said, oh, okay, and who's Leon? She said, oh, that's a boy from school and he's bigger than me. Okay, so why did you draw Leon like this? And she said, because he's ugly and he looks like a monster. I had to catch my breath and pause as the disappointment, sadness, and a little bit of anger started to rise within me. This child had, for the first few years of her life, had uttered nothing but kindness. Yet these words that she just mouthed that she just expressed, were just full of, I guess, cruelty in reality. So I paused and I thought, how can I best use this moment to build connection with her and to really have a more empathic approach, not only from her, but from myself. So I asked her the question, do you think that's kind or unkind? Her response, I should say, was silence. So I thought, okay, I need to try this again, try in a different approach. So then I asked her, how would you feel if somebody called you ugly and a monster? Would you feel good about it? Would you want to go to school and see your friends? And she said, she just kind of shrugged, eyes to the floor. So then I tried again and I said, would your heart hurt or would your heart smile? And she said, my heart would hurt. And I saw her lips begin to quiver, her shoulders slumped, and the emotion poured out of her. I held her tightly and reassured her that, she was still very much loved, but she needed to choose kindness. And I never, ever use the words ugly or monster to describe anyone. As we held each other, as I said, I repeated the mantra, we must always choose kindness. You see, that moment for me was a learning opportunity, not only for my daughter, but also for myself as a parent. And even if you're not a parent, as a teacher or as a leader, where we have this wonderful, but also huge responsibility of modeling kindness and modeling empathic behavior towards one another and, of course, towards ourselves. And as I was doing this presentation together, I actually began reading a book at the same time. And by coincidence, I don't really subscribe to coincidences. I think everything, kind of is connected. I came across this wonderful story. And this story really resonated with me and really drove home the message of how important empathy is in the context of education and the lifelong impacts we can have. Not only on individuals, but the world itself. So this particular book that I'm referring to was written by a child trauma specialist and a child psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Bruce D. Perry. So as I thought about my own daughter's story, I also, as I said, really connected with this story as well. I won't tell you the entire story, but just give you a quick summary to get to the crux of what I'm trying to express today. Dr. Bruce T. Perry shares this amazing story of a young child by the name of Peter. Just to give you a bit of context, Peter was an orphan, and the first 3 years of his life went in a crib. During these first 3 years, Peter was not given any love or attention. It was simply, attended to on a very basic level. And it wasn't just Peter, it was a number of young infants and children who were in the exact same situation. As a result of this, Peter's development was, especially social development, was quite behind. And of course, some brain development was also impacted by this. But at the age of 3, Peter was very, very blessed to have 2 very kind and loving individuals who adopted him. They not only took him into their home, but in their hearts. 2 very loving parents who gave their all to, help Peter heal, to help Peter thrive. And of course, they did not do it alone. They had a group of professionals supporting Peter along this particular journey. And one of them was, of course, Dr. Bruce D. Perry. Now, Peter began to show amazing progress. He began to exhibit happiness, still, and of course, still struggled in many ways, but was thriving. But that all changed when school came along. Peter went through kindergarten and struggled immensely. His parents were exasperated. They were seeing that Peter was regressing to behaviours that they thought he had moved away from less, socially acceptable behaviours and such. This unfortunately created a barrier between Peter and his peers. Young children and even his teachers did not know what to do. When Peter did have fierce outbursts, began to snatch toys, would begin to, place himself in a fetal position and such. As a result, Peter became more and more ostracized, more and more isolated, and became more and more alone. His parents reached out to Bruce D. Perry for some assistance, and this is where the magic happens. Bruce D. Perry decided that this kind of, change can only happen in context and in the context of relationship. Bruce D. Perry decided, with Peter's permission, of course, to visit Peter's school. And he talked to these 26 grade 1 students about Peter's amazing brain. And by unpacking this in an age-appropriate way, the children began to understand Peter a lot more. And after this talk, these 26 grade 1 students now saw Peter as their friend, now saw Peter as someone they had to nurture and love and take care of. In fact, Peter became so popular, children began to fight over him. And Dr. Bruce D. Perry ends this story with a fantastic quote. Relationships are the agents of change, and the most powerful therapy is human love. And this is exactly what we saw with Peter, with my story with my own daughter, Layla, that relationships can be the agent of change, can really change the world, even from a very small level, and then form a more empathic experience. Now over to, how do we do this in our debating and public speaking programs? Most people assume public speaking and debating is about, you just got to get up and, be confident, express your point of view or argue a point, provide a sound rebuttal, but it is far more than that. What we really like to focus on at Speaking Schools Australasia is building life skills that can be transferred into students' personal and professional relationships in the short and long term. The 3 areas I'm going to touch upon today are audience engagement and building connection, oral storytelling and role play, broadening one's horizons and staying curious, and link them back to how we can use these 3 areas to build a more empathic classroom. So I'll start with audience engagement and building connection. One of the key things that we do, and I'll focus on public speaking to begin with, when we are helping students through a course or one of our programs, and they're building their way up towards presenting, which can be rather daunting, as you can imagine, for most of world's population, but especially for students who are still finding their voice and are still trying to, I guess, find themselves in that journey, along that journey. So with the audience engagement, we ask the students to really consider the audience as opposed to themselves. So essentially what we're doing is we're shifting the mindset that the presentation is not about me, it's about my audience. What do I want them to feel? What do I want them to experience from my presentation? By even doing that and shifting our mindset from it's not about me, it's about what I can give to another, that is a foundation towards building a more empathic mindset. In terms of eye contact, something that many teachers and of course public speakers in general have been told, it shows that you're confident. And yes, of course, it can do that, but it is far more impactful than just confidence. Eye contact can be a key to building connection. And when we have connection with another human being, then there is more likely to be an empathic exchange between the presenter and the audience, or even between two people in a relationship. As you can see, these two beautiful little ones looking deeply into each other's eyes with pure joy and love. In fact, there is a neurobiologist by the name of Dr. Dan Siegel who talks a lot about brain development and emotional intelligence and building a more empathic world. And he sums it up just beautifully. When we look into another's eyes, we feel an echo within our own body of what another is needing. This process is automatic, beneath awareness, and is a significant component of empathy. I mean, that for me was profound. When you look into another's eyes, you experience an echo of what the other is needing. And that goes back to, it's not about me, it's also about what another requires from me and with me. And if we can do that, even in a simple presentation, by building eye contact, by building engagement, we build connection, and connection builds more empathy. Second area is oral storytelling and role play. So here are some of our students participating in telling one of their stories. Story, again, it really builds connection. I mean, I started today with sharing a story that personal, but also, and I guess it was a way to build connection where maybe your story or your experience could be similar to mine, or where when someone does narrate a story orally, we listen, but we also become a participant, where we experience another's joys, another's sorrows, ups and downs, victories and failings. So sharing story has been part of many cultures throughout the world's history and has been a powerful tool to build community. Again, it comes back to, if we build community, and then we're more likely to have more empathy, more likely to have, of course, connection. In fact, there was a fantastic study done by a group of child psychiatrists as well as educational professionals in 2016, and it was called The Psychosocial Benefits of Oral Storytelling and Role Play, so in 2016. And what they found was when students partake in oral storytelling and role playing, not only did they have academic progress, such as stronger vocabulary acquisition and better communication skills, and of course, more pro-social behaviors. That was the key, that more pro-social behaviors led to a more empathic classroom. A great activity that I like to do with my students in terms of sharing a story and building a more empathic classroom is something that I like to call story circles. This involves students sitting in a circle. You can do it at a desk, for example, or at a table, I should say, or on the floor. I prefer the floor. It's everyone grounded. Everyone is in a sacred circle where they're able to maintain that eye contact that we've touched upon and really engage in an oral storytelling experience. Each student is given a prompt. That prompt will help them share a moment that maybe they may have been slightly vulnerable, such as the most embarrassing moment of their life, or a person that they deeply admire or has helped change their life. Of course, these topics need to be assigned to age-appropriate age-appropriate contexts. And as each student shares their story within that sacred space, within that circle, we become, again, a participant where we can resonate potentially with something that the storyteller has shared. We're also becoming, and we can also be more empathic to their own journey and their own experience and perspectives. In the journal that I mentioned before, there was a beautiful way to kind of, I guess, explain this, that students have a much more limited life experience and reference of the world. So through oral storytelling and role play, they are able to experience the emotional content of another. And that is exactly what empathy is, to experience the emotional content of another, even if you don't fully understand it, even if you haven't experienced it yourself in life, but you may be given the opportunity to at least try and experience the emotional content of another, and therefore approach them with far more empathy. In terms of debating, so I'm just going to finish up on this last area of broadening one's horizons and staying curious. Debating is fantastic for this. Through debating, students really need to employ critical thinking where they unpack perspectives, they unpack issues, and they even question their own perspectives, their own sources of information. And by staying curious, you're more likely to ask questions. If you're asking questions, you're more likely to be far more tolerant, far more open-minded, and connect far more with other people. Even if you don't agree with their perspective, you can still maintain this openness and receptivity. I remember listening to a TED talk about empathy a long time ago, and it was basically, the crux of it was that the speaker did have quite a different perspective on something, and the people that responded to the talk, some of them, well, not to the TED talk, but to the speaker's points of views generally through social media, he received quite a lot of hate, actually, and disrespect. And I remember, his name is Dylan Moran, and I remember Dylan saying something quite profound, which I believe not enough of us are taught, that we don't need to agree. We don't need to, I guess, agree with another perspective, or we don't need to necessarily embrace it. But what we can do is acknowledge difference. And he says, empathy is not an endorsement. It is an acknowledgement of another's humanity who was raised differently to me. I think this is very powerful. Acknowledging another's humanity who was raised to think differently to me. And it's something that we need to remind our students of, and ourselves of, I think, quite a lot. Because most people feel that if you don't agree, that you're personally rejecting them. But we want to move away. So we want to build a classroom where we are allowed to express our different points of views, where we are receptive of differences, and we embrace them and really try to empathize with why someone feels or thinks the way that they do. A couple of things that I like to use in my class to really drive this home is there's one particular activity we call rebuttal tennis. So in debating, you basically choose speaker A, speaker B, so two students. They come up to the front of the room. Speaker A represents the affirmative, speaker B represents the negative. You might give them a simple topic or a controversial topic, again, depending on the age and the experience level of the students. The topic is presented, and speaker A needs to present their point of view, the affirmative, and then the negative needs to represent a rebuttal. They do this in a very impromptu fashion. There is a time limit set. But what it does, it opens discussion. And part of the rules of this game are that we don't interrupt each other. We remain active listeners. We acknowledge another's perspective before we respond. So by doing what this seems as a fun game, we're actually planting those seeds of being critical thinkers, staying curious, and ultimately being more empathic. The one other thing that I like to do in the context of debating as well, and building more empathy around acknowledging different perspectives, is getting students to partake in a discussion that, on issues that mean a lot to them. So, for example, it could be, let's say, the environment, quite topical at the moment. A lot of people are engaged, politically charged, and divided on this particular area of the world. And if we, let's say, break down the environment, because it's quite broad, and we break it down to something a little bit more narrow, such as, let's say, single-use plastics. So a lot of students, of course, and myself included, would be like, no, single-use plastics, they need to be banned. They're terrible for the environment. And you could rattle off an entire list of why we should ban them, and understandably so. But what we want to do now is we take this discussion where people are very much for banning single-use plastics as an example, and we flip it. And as a teacher, we flip and we say, okay, now it's time to really see this issue from a very different perspective, where we tap into someone else's experience. So for example, single-use plastics could actually provide a livelihood for a family. It could be a particular person in a family unit that has a job, that is employed. In fact, I remember reading something a long time ago. There are 30,000 jobs created because of single-use plastics. Now again, this doesn't mean that we necessarily agree, but we acknowledge another person's experience. We acknowledge why this could benefit another human being, and be a little bit more empathic for people who do support the single-use plastic and continue to be used in our world. And now that might be a far-fetched example, sure, but what we're trying to do here is just get people to really think outside their own frame of reference of the world, and really consider that other people are living a very different existence. And as a result of that, we'll hold very different perspectives around issues that you may be strongly opposed to. Overall, no matter what we do, no matter what we say, I guess what I've come up with as a parent and as a teacher is we just need to model that empathy as best as we can, not only towards others, but to ourselves. And we at Speaking Schools Australasia really believe that if we have an empathic classroom, then we have happier students. And happier students means they are more well-adjusted. Students who then enter the adult world, where they carry this torch of kindness, and they leave an inspiring legacy for generations to come. If you're curious to know more about public speaking and debating, and a few things that I've talked about, we have free online resources for parents, teachers, and students alike to tap into. I've got it up here on the last slide. Our YouTube channel and Facebook page offer many instructional videos that are fun and engaging, and of course are free for all of you to use.